what happens when a man walks away from the corporate ladder, trades the BMW in for a beat-up hatchback, and decides to heal instead of hustle. Well, on today's episode of Daring to Dad, I talk with therapist and the clinical director of Kickstart Men's Therapy, John Shearer. From his own journey through job loss and fatherhood to helping other men reconnect with their emotions and purpose, John brings clarity, honesty, and deep insight into what it means to be a man and a dad today. So whether you're curious about therapy, rethinking masculinity, or just trying to show up better for your kids, this one's for you. Let's go. Okay, then. Man, I'm so glad you could join us this morning. Thanks so much. I know that, you're a busy guy, got clients you're seeing because you are a therapist. You run a practice there.
Yeah, so I'm the clinic owner and therapist at Kickstart Men's Therapy. So myself and a handful of other therapists for men work with guys, dads, teens, boys with a variety of issues out of our office here.
That's amazing. I'm curious about that. I find myself fascinated and curious about how men find their way to this work. Less than 25% of therapists are men.
Yeah.
What led you to this work?
It's funny, when I started out, and again, I got into this very late in life. I had a long career in the corporate, more traditional space before this. I was always asking guys who had been therapists longer than me or at all, how did you even know about this? So yeah, this idea that most therapists are women and very few are men is kind of the reason why I'm doing this, because when I was going through something in my life and I needed to find support and help, I was there's no dudes around who I feel like I would connect with or that were even doing this really. And again, it's not a 100 and 0 thing, but harder to find a male therapist for sure. In my area here, it's probably about 70% women, maybe a bit higher. But even then, gender aside, I didn't feel like a lot of the male therapists I was finding were someone that I would connect to, right? Even within the gender paradigm, it was different for me. So yeah, that was kind of my calling, was if I see a problem, I want to kind of dive into it and tackle that. So that's how I started to come into the space, was just seeing that kind of lack of men doing the work. I think bigger picture, which I'm sure we'll get into, thinking about how the issues with boys and men in the world and these bigger kind of topics out there, I started to see it for myself as, not just looking at the problem from the outside. I wanted to actually address it personally. And, I could have joined a board of directors or done kind of peripheral work. But at the time of my life, it was, no, you're going to dive headfirst into this and actually make the difference with what you're doing with your life.
Yeah, you recently talked about, I saw it on your social media, about taking off the suit and walking away from the luxury car. That's a bold move.
Yeah.
Tell me more about what was going on maybe internally for you at that time and that draw out of that world into this.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's a really big story of my whole kind of how my world and my life has changed over the years. But when my son was born, so I came from a corporate career as objectively quite successful. I made good money, I had BMW, all these things that were these status symbols that, again, as a traditional man, I thought that's what I needed to have. That's all I knew, really. My son was born, and I wouldn't say I was ill prepared, but I'm just there. That's what, as a dad, I was. And 2 months later, I lost my job. So I got fired from the company I was working for. They were going in a different direction. So I went from a top leadership position to here's your check, you're out. And I had no tools to deal with that. Again, coming from a place of privilege, I had never encountered that kind of pain, and shame was a big part of it. Again, these, all of a sudden, all the parts of masculinity that I defined myself by were just ripped away. I was now a father without a job, unable to provide for my family, with no clue of what I want to do with my life, and just how much I'd invested in the career as who I was. It was always the thing that I could be like, yeah, but I have this job that defines me. So without that, who was I? And that was a huge question in my life. I didn't answer it quickly. It didn't come quickly to me. I tried some other things. But that was kind of like the push for me that led me down this path. I quite honestly wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that. Like, in the world I was in, I don't think there would have been another kind of vehicle to drive me to this work other than my own suffering. And, it was the question to me is, what will you do about this? Right. Like, that's what led me here.
I don't know if this is your experience. It's been mine in my personal life, and it's been mine working with men, that seems to be the turning point, is when a man faces this moment, right, in his life where he comes face to face with the question that you just asked is, what am I without this?
Yeah.
It's a job, it's a marriage, it's a loss, it's a personal failure of some sort that pushes men into this, and can be an initiatory experience into the next phase of their life, or not, depending on how they react. Has that been your experience?
For me, it was for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I was faced with that question, like, what do I do? And again, like, it wasn't like it was an immediate 180. I remember I went on these interviews to like these lateral positions in the corporate world. And I was like, man, like, this is doing nothing for me. Like, I feel no sense of purpose or fulfillment interviewing for these jobs. And I really started to realize that it wasn't what I was meant to do. I also had to start to realize that answering this question also means that I'm probably not going to have the lifestyle I'd had before. Like, there's some significant changes that come with opting out of capitalism at that level, right?
Yeah.
So these are all bigger questions as a dad and as a partner and as a husband. As a professional now in this space, yeah, like, most men are coming to therapy with the crisis moment, right? I work really hard to try to change that through my messaging of like, let's be proactive with this. And again, that's why, like, my practice exists, is I want to get to guys and husbands and dads and teenagers before, so they have the tools, so that when life does come at them, which it will, like, no one escapes this forever, that they have a sense of how to handle it. When we live within traditional masculinity to the degree that we've closed off everything, that works for a while, and it can work really well. Again, like, my success was as a result of being emotionless. So being stoic as a boss and like being able to fire people and do these things that, this world asked of me without emotion made me wealthy. And I only knew that as a good thing until it was the thing that like ripped me apart. So yeah, like, it's that big question, what are you without these things? And it's really what one of my big missions is in this space, is to help men before they need the help. I'm obviously here for them when they need it, but let's be proactive with how we look at our personal development.
And I feel like so many guys understand this idea from like a physical standpoint, right? Like, okay, it's important to work out, right? To exercise your body, to eat, to lift, to build muscle, to prevent like injury, right? To work on things like mobility, flexibility, all these types of things to prevent that big injury, right?
Right.
And it's I love what you're saying, because it's really that same idea when it comes to our mental, emotional, like, well-being, right? That we're doing the practice, we're doing the work, we're working on emotional and mental flexibility to be able to weather those big storms, those big moments when they happen.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, we're talking about men specifically. Physical strength is a strength. Emotional strength, emotional well-being is a weakness. Like, we don't live in a world where those skills are seen as much of a benefit, right? and that's through socialization, all these other things.
Mhm.
And again, it works. Like it works while you need it for that time. And that's the point is like,
Yeah.
living in that world, you only see the benefits of it. I never saw any downside to how I'd been living. Again, I didn't choose it. I wasn't like waking up each day being like, I'm gonna like really shut down today. That's just all I knew. I came from that world. I came from an athletics world, which was also like tough it out, be tough, don't be hurt, like all these things that I internalized as a boy. So that's just who I was. Like I had no decision making process in that. Um, and that's just what right? So I would go to the gym and work out and work on my physical health, but you also don't know what you don't know, right?
Mhm.
Like I wouldn't, if you would have asked me at that point in my life, are you emotionally closed off? And here's the big thing from the business world, are you emotionally intelligent, right? That's this big
Mhm.
thing. I'm like, of course, like very high on that. Uh, wasn't, couldn't have
Yeah.
been.
Right.
And
Yeah.
if you had have asked me, I'd be like, totally, yeah. Probably that's my high performing anxiety at play, like being hyper
Mhm.
vigilant to everything
Yeah.
around me. But it's even this like misconception we have of our own awareness. I see that with men all the time in the work I do, where they come in and are rating themselves quite high in a lot of these categories, and it's complete bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's not their fault because they don't know the difference. But that's where we kind of start sometimes, is peeling back those layers.
Yeah. Do you think that there's any shifting happening at all with men and therapy? And I feel like culturally, right, there's like therapy's having this moment,
Yeah.
right? We're in like our therapy era.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's I know this is kind of wildly debatable, but specifically with men, is it becoming more acceptable? And why, if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah. I think it is. Again, I live in a bubble, right? Like I only know really the guys who are coming to therapy. That's who I work with.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, I know how hard it is to get a lot of men into the space. Um, I think for sure it's better than it used to be. Like again, when I needed this support, I look back on my life 20 years ago when I was in university, thinking what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't even like number 500 on the list would have been to be a therapist. Like, it
Mm.
wasn't even like I would have
Yeah.
thought that was like being an astronaut. Like, it just didn't
Sure.
even make any
Yeah.
sense at all, right?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So even like the whole world of it was just so foreign back then. Even look generationally, like my own parents, when I said I was going to be a therapist, were like, well, what is that? Like,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
going to work in like a psychiatric hospital? Just
Sure.
the idea of just going to ask for support from somebody else has definitely become more okay. For me, I credit women a lot for this, right? Because like they're the partners
Mm.
who are like, hey, I want you to go talk to someone. I think it'd be really helpful. My business here, which thrives, doesn't exist without women helping the men in their lives seek out the support. And I'm always thanking my referral sources and the women around me who are like, hey, dude, like, I know you're struggling. Go talk to John. So that's a big part of it, I think.
Yeah. I agree. I think that part of the reason that we're seeing it become more acceptable for guys is I think women are demanding it from
Yeah.
men.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we're looking for like emotionally healthy and good men,
Yeah.
right? It's like we want to feel safe around guys, and part of that is your ability to navigate and manage your shit.
Like,
So, like, go to therapy. So I think there's a moment for that. But you're right. I mean, same. Like most of the initial conversations with the guy start because I get a DM on Instagram
yeah.
from a girlfriend, wife, or someone saying, hey, this is, my husband or partner, well, would love to work with you. Is it okay if you reach out to him? And we go in a lot of directions from there. And typically that is a lot of the areas that we first explore with the guy. It's like, so, I heard from your girlfriend, why am I not hearing from you?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we dive into some of those things, but
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think it's having a moment, and we can credit women for that, for sure. Another question as far as like men in therapy go, what don't though women understand about men in therapy?
Yeah. Do you mean like more like women
So
therapists or like what?
in general, like what are some things out there when because I hear a lot of the um like men just need to go to therapy. Like, why don't men go to
Yeah.
therapy? Um, and then when men are in therapy, they struggle, they're
Yeah.
uncomfortable, they drop out. What's something that the women or the world don't understand about how men walk into therapy and their experience there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think there's a big gap in the awareness of how hard it truly is, right? Again, women haven't been socialized as boys. So they don't, I mean, we're casting a broad net here, but
Sure.
typically most women are already comfortable with their emotions and talking about those things. And most women have a good amount of friends who they can talk openly with things about, right? The conversations women are having with their friends are very different than the ones men are having.
Uh-huh.
So I think there's this, yeah, men need to go to therapy, fair, but we're missing the point about how truly difficult that idea is for a lot of men to be open with somebody, right? Um, Whether that's a stranger like a therapist, but often more so just themselves. Like, I do not want to speak the words that I've held on to for 20 years, right? This pain inside me from my childhood, it
Yeah.
had its place in this box, and like, I just want to keep it there.
Uh-huh.
Um, we're, our bodies are comfortable with what they already know. And even if it's a lot of pain, we'll take that pain over the unfamiliarity of potentially something different.
Uh-huh.
So I think the big thing that women don't know is just how truly hard it is. It's not like I'm being lazy or I'm just don't want to
Uh-huh.
do it. It seems almost like this is the scariest thing I could imagine doing is going
Yeah.
and like talking about some of my pain to somebody.
Yeah. I was talking a couple weeks ago here on the podcast. And I don't know if you follow Patch or not, Patch
Yeah, I've
McCormick.
heard that.
Yeah. 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 We had, and one of the things that we talked about, and it's been sitting with me ever since, is that you mentioned that a guy has this thing that he's been packing away deep inside for a long time. It's something they have in his childhood and doesn't want to bring it forward. That maybe a lot of guys don't even know how to bring it forward because they don't know what to name it. They don't know what
Yeah.
we have not been given a language of emotion. And so when you walk into a room and you sit down with a therapist, especially maybe if you're with someone else, you're with a partner,
Yeah.
and you walk in and all of a sudden you have a therapist who's trained in this area. You have your partner, who, let's just say in this example, is a woman who has a more of a natural and predisposition to speak in emotional language. And
Mhm.
you're like, the guy at the wine tasting who has no idea about wine, and everybody else is like, doing the wine thing and tasting all the things, and you're like, I don't know what to do, and you feel awkward and weird,
Yeah.
and so you check out,
Yeah. Yeah.
and that's been sitting with me so much about how we instill even like an emotional language and identifying so that you feel more, because for guys, when you're sitting in a space and you feel incompetent, ugh, get me out of there, right?
Yeah.
You want to bail so quick.
So yeah, going to your question, what women don't know, what don't they know? My mind goes to like therapists who identify as women and providing therapy to men without, again, they have a doubly stacked bias. One is they're already women who probably are able to express themselves emotionally because of being raised that way. And secondly, they're a therapist and they're encountering a man, to your point, who doesn't have. My first conversation with a guy is, do you know what an emotion is? Okay. I don't mean that in a pandering way. It's legitimately where I start. Do we know what we're talking about when we talk about this, right? And a lot of men do not know. They're like, I don't know what that's referring to. Obviously, I can like say what an emotion is, but I don't know how to feel that. I don't know how to detect it or to label it or give it a name. And that's where a lot of men are led astray in therapy, is starting at a place that they're not at yet. So one of the most common referrals I get personally is from couples therapists who send me a guy and are like, he's got to do some things before they meet as a couple because we're not using the same language, right? And just imagine how that relationship is strained when the guy doesn't know the language his wife is using.
Right.
Or when they're asked to connect emotionally, they're like, I don't know what that means. Like, and 9 times out of 10, what that means to the guy is to talk a lot about things, right? So I'm going to just turn on this problem solving brain that I have and talk a lot about how to fix it and this and that, but never actually going inside to what they're feeling.
So what do you say? So what do you say to a guy when if you're like, do you know what an emotion is? And they're just like, I don't know. Like, how do you help a man work through that?
Yeah. So I personally have what I think is like a pretty helpful mindfulness exercise I use that kind of runs through this of like, think of something difficult in your life, bring that into your mind. Let's notice where that is in our body. Let's, kind of name that, label it, maybe give it some physical property to it. Let's breathe into that space. So I'm going through kind of a range of exercises with guys to start to integrate these different aspects, the naming of things, how it feels inside of our bodies, how we can actually, relate to that thing. My own kind of clinical training is more in this acceptance world. So, let's not get rid of that thing, but let's learn that that's something that you have inside of you. And when you have that capacity, then you can speak to your partner in a much different way. It is mind blowing when guys come back to me after trying this with their partners, the results, right? So they went from an hour talking to their wife about something to one sentence of, I'm feeling really hurt right now. And because they can now connect to that, changes the relationship, right? But they didn't know that. They didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know it. Like, this is the point. Like, we don't know what we don't know. So when we're in therapy, starting at this level that maybe the therapist thinks we should already be at, because why wouldn't you be? It doesn't work for guys. We need to kind of start with some of this like psychoeducation to learn what we never learned when we were 7 years old, right?
Yeah.
When we packed away all that stuff when we were 6 and 7 years old and never touched it again, we lost all of that learning of what these things are, what they mean, what they feel like. And that's an important step for most guys in therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. So important. That understanding that language and feeling like you can walk into a space with some confidence and to build emotional, mental health, like confidence in the way that you approach that. So huge. I want to talk and shift a little bit to something that I've heard you talk a little about recently.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like masculinity, identity in the second half of life. You quoted recently James Hollis and Carl Jung around second half of life. I'm 43 and I feel like I'm walking into that right now. And I've been thinking a lot about this idea of this next half of my life and what I want to do, what I want to be about, how do I want to integrate the first half into the second half? What do I want to leave behind?
Sure.
All these things. How have you experienced that yourself?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I explained, like, I was forced into that second half of life experience, right? I went through job loss and parenthood at the same time. And I was forced into that point of my life. And I had to figure that out. I figured it out in a way that was organic to me without like the philosophical background I would have now as, having done my training and everything. But it's something that comes up so often for me. Like, one of the most common reasons men seek support through my clinic here is like, I don't know what I want from life. Like, who am I? And again, it's not even like super existential in that case. It's just like, I feel lost, right? Like I don't enjoy things. I'm stuck. Um, it's a heavy question, right? Like when we remove all of these labels and jobs and titles and, you know, money and things that we've defined ourselves, what's left? And, you know, I look at that as like, what do you want to be about in your life? Just because that matters to you, even if it's not what everyone else wants or
Mhm.
the pressures of society. And that's really scary because often that path isn't an easy one, right?
Mhm.
Again, like my own story is a testament to that. I left this high paying corporate world. The first thing I kind of did was went and worked a minimum wage job working with homeless teenagers. So, you know, I wanted to, this was my own version of like going to the monastery and like finding yourself. I had a
Mm.
kid at home and a family. Like I couldn't disappear. So I got a job doing something for minimum wage basically here in Canada. And I needed to know what my purpose was. And through the work I was doing, I had stripped away all these things. Like I had to drive a different car to work because like I didn't want to have to answer the question why a 36-year-old man was like, you know, working this entry level job. And masculinity was in tow the whole time, right? These expectations that my brain was like, this isn't what you should be doing. Like, why are you doing this? Why aren't you running this company? Why are you, you know, the entry level worker? Like all these things that my brain was screaming at me, I had to deal with. I had to deal with my friends and family being like, what are you doing? Like, you've built up a career and now you're starting over again. So again, it's scary and it's hard when we encounter that question. Um, but it's sometimes what life demands of us to be able to feel free again. And that's a lot of the work I do with guys. And again, to be perfectly honest, like not everyone is able to do that. Um, there's a lot of realistic concerns that get in the way of being able to just like start fresh. But
Yeah.
um, that's the question is like, who are you without those things? And who do you want to be most importantly?
Yeah. Let's talk about, you mentioned recently precarious manhood.
Mhm.
And what are some of the pressures that men are under that make them hard to just be? Because, like, with what you said, to contemplate that and to face that requires a moment to stop and think. And in your case, it was kind of like forced on you, right?
Yeah.
And I think there are times in my life when that's happened where it's like, I just, boom, I ran into this brick wall and it forced me to like be still. But for so many guys in our day to day lives, we're just boom, going, next thing, next thing, next thing.
Sure.
What's the challenge there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge that men face again is those like socialized beliefs, right? Like the precarious masculinity idea is that it's performative at all times, you know? Like unlike being a woman where you are a
Mm-hmm.
woman, you have the biological stuff happening. Masculinity is this performance about how manly you are.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's critical because this research that I was referencing that you're referring to talks about how when you don't adhere to these masculine norms, you feel really bad. Like you get anxiety. When you're outside of the man box, so to speak, it actually has a psychological toll on you, right? So it's this double-edged sword. There's this idea of called gender role strain paradigm. On one hand, men are always trying to be this traditional masculine type, right? That's what the patriarchy is seeking. And if you get there, you suffer because it's this closed off, isolated existence, right? You benefit, in many ways, as we do, but internally you're suffering inherently. On the other side, if you rebel from that and go in the opposite direction, you're always then not man enough, right?
Mm.
So there is no winning in this. And that's what's so hard about it is no matter which way you go, either you succeed with manhood and then you have all those traditional elements that actually make you worse off, or you rebel and resist against it and you're constantly faced with that pressure of not being man enough. And that's why it's so hard, right? It's always kind of walking that tightrope of who am I? How do I do this? For me and for a lot of guys who've done this work, you get to a place where you're good with who you are, right? I don't have the same hangups on this as I used to. I remember dreading going to like meet up with my guy friends who I hadn't seen in a while and telling them what I was doing now. Like, it was like, I'm going to be hazed or something, right? And again, it's not true, but you're so socialized into that mindset that it's what you think is going to happen. But you even see it around you. Again, I mentioned my own parents, like, why would you do this? Like, go work at the corporate job and make money and da da da. So it's around us at all times.
It starts young too, because and we can kind of move into some of the being fatherhoods and being dads and how fatherhood impacts some of this stuff for us. But I see it I have a 12-year-old son. He's a pre-teenage boy, and you see some of these patterns begin to manifest in these young boys and the way they hang out, right? And the sizing up and the conversation and the vulnerability and, creating these like kind of pecking orders of guys, especially on the athletic field and the sports field and how that works. And and then you begin to reflect on your own childhood and you see some of those patterns and how they start out so young for us. And as much as, we try to be conscious about these spaces and these conversations with these guys, it still finds its way in, right? It still finds its way into these systems. And I don't know if I have an answer there. I mean, we hear a lot of people talk about like young boys and how some of these patterns start out in our lives at a very young age, but it's really fascinating.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say about that is, and this goes into maybe the bigger topic about like, why do this work, is because as men, it's not enough just to talk about it. We have to model it, right? So to just like sit there in your corporate office and say, yes, masculinity and boyhood and all these things are a problem in society right now, isn't enough. Like, you have to step up and do something. Boys are looking to their mentors, to men in their life, for what this actually should look like. Even then, it doesn't necessarily work that well. I have a 5-year-old son, and even though I've raised him with what I know about this world, which, arguably is this healthy version of masculinity, he was, 4 years old at junior kindergarten and came home one day and said, like, boys don't cry, right? So, again, this is everywhere. It's really hard to not have this overarching theme of what things are prevalent in their lives. My son, when I cry, is like flabbergasted by it, right? Like, he'll actually check my face to make sure I'm genuinely tearing up when I'm moved by something, because he can't imagine a man is doing that. Even though that's a part of, like, I don't hide that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I modeled emotionality with my children. I think men need to do that much more. But again, like, that's how insidious this is as a culture, that even in my home, we're like, this is the number one thing for me, is to be that man. My son still is like shocked when he sees me emotionally, right? So it's a really challenging thing to face.
Yeah, for our kids to see the fullness of who we are, right?
Yeah.
And for and I think that is the invitation for men today, is to, hey, for however many centuries now, like, we've kind of operated in just these few levels, but there's this invitation and this opportunity now to experience the fullness of who you are as a person, right? And the depth of who you are as a person. And, that takes some adjustment, but I think that's really important for our kids to experience our highs and our lows and how we weather those things.
Yeah.
And I think that then is why something like therapy is important. Okay, now I have these tools to manage these moments in my home, to model for my kids, right? Because it's important for my kids to know, like, hey, dad's going to experience these different things, but he can do that and remain safe.
Yeah. That's a huge part of the therapy I do. Like I do a lot of work with dads. It's kind of my like niche within the niche is dad. Because again, I'm living that life myself, right?
Yeah.
And many of my clients would say that their fathers gave them pretty much like nothing in the terms of emotional connection. So, traditional kind of last generation of parenting. So they then are choosing to be more present with their kids through play, through jokes, through silliness, all great stuff. My point to them is always, what about the rest of it, right? Because that's not just what life is about. And if you're only showing your children as a man that happy, fun, excited, joyful, athletic, well, what are they going to think when they feel the other half of the human condition, which is sadness, despair, disappointment, frustration? They won't even be able to feel like that's okay to experience. But that's why therapy matters, because for most men, they don't know themselves what those things are, right? It's just this like feeling. I had one client years ago who was off work for bad anxiety, only able to describe it as like shit. Like that's, he had no way to describe his this huge feeling he was having with any word that was not just like a swear word. So yeah, that's why that really matters, right? Modeling everything to kids, because that's that's the reality of life. I think that's what a lot of men struggle with, is that other half of it. But I mean, that's just as important, maybe even more important.
Yeah. I think I think you're really onto something there when it comes to modeling for kids, but I think just men in general. And I hear this talked about maybe in some little, corners of the web somewhere, but this idea of just mentorship and eldership.
Yeah.
And I mean, I even think of like, we would talk about kind of the second half of life, guys. Like, I know I long for mentorship. Like, show me like, the calloused hands and tender hearts of, these men that are 20, 30 years ahead of me. Like, I feel like I still long for that, like in my life, that type of, wisdom and mentorship from other men.
Yeah.
And there's something about that I don't know if we've lost that, or it's just buried underneath all the deluge of information and content and all these other things. But I sense that we could use a return to some more of that in our world.
Yeah, it almost feels to me like those men are mythical. Like there's not many guys out there like that. They're there for sure. Like it's not, that's a zero thing, but not many. I mentioned before, when I talk to like an older male therapist who's been doing this work for a long time, I'm just always blown away. I'm like, how on earth in like 1990 did you, how is this even an option for you? Right? Like, what would have been going on in your life that this was a thing you could have done back then? Knowing how much barriers there are for men to do this work, right? Whether that's financial, like whatever it is. So yeah, I mean, I think that's something that's really important. I before I was a therapist, I did some work with the Big Brothers program as like a mentor there. And that was so important for me to see kind of how boys were being shaped. It actually would like kind of led me to open up my practice to working with teenagers and not just adults, was seeing kind of like, okay, we need to start younger. That's the whole point of like being proactive. Like, let's help these, 15, 16-year-olds learn this stuff and not just wait until they're married with kids and like breaking down because they don't know what they need to do. So, yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about fatherhood. And you started this work when it sounds like your child was fairly young.
Yeah.
And how has that shifted, how getting into this work, doing what you're doing now, shifted the way that you're showing up at home?
I mean, in every way, right? And again, like I'm always clear about this. Before this work, I had done nothing. Like I had never gone to therapy. I had never thought about my mental health. So I would have just been on autopilot parenting, right? Um, I honestly wonder with how much of like the social media parenting stuff comes into play, how I would have adapted to all of that without the skill set to be present and those types of things. The biggest thing for me and the work that I've done over the past number of years is through my mindfulness practice of being able to be present, to be able to turn off my overactive brain thinking about something work related or something else and be there with my kids. That's been really important to me, just to be present. Yeah, this is something we talk about often with guys, is like with the dads I work with, it's not just that you're physically there, it's that you're there, like that you're present. And that's an important thing. I'd say secondly, equal footing is knowing what my values are as a dad, as a parent, right? A lot of men don't know what they want to be about. Just like, I want to be a good dad, of course, but what does that actually look like for you?
Yeah.
You know, what are the types of things you want to do each day that lead you to be the good dad that you're seeking? No one's going to say they don't want to be a good dad, but tell me what that actually looks like. And that's critical because our tendencies are often different things, you know, retreat, get away from this, you know, whatever that is. So I think being present and having the skills to be present, it's not as, yes, it's a choice, but there's also skill involved there. It's like, you know, neuroplasticity stuff. And then knowing what I actually care about as a father, like what's important to me, are two of the really key aspects for me.
No, that's so true. I love what you're saying, because having that really clear sense of what is most important to you,
Yeah.
and it's so helpful for making those decisions too in life, right? With your kids and whatever's coming up, and especially if you're, you have a partner, a spouse, parenting partner, whatever, and you can align on those. Well, then it's like, because it's really easy to get overwhelmed in like the day to day, right? Of parenting and all these different decisions. But if you have this big idea of like, hey, these are my North Stars, then like, okay, well, it makes all those small decisions and how I want to show up in this moment with that in mind. Everything I can get in alignment with that. If I have some words or an idea to wrap around, then I'm not just flailing in this moment. I can go back to that and be like, oh yeah, for example, I know that I'm keep on bringing up my 12-year-old, but he's got some of this early like teen angst stuff going on, and so my parenting partner, his mom. We're talking about, okay, hey, how are we going to tackle this? What's our stance going into these teen years? And in my mind, I have this like motto of like steady presence. That's what I want to be, from a steady presence, right? Mm-hmm. And I go back to this little mantra, right? I have this vision for what like I want for myself and what is good parenting here. And yes, there are all little details under that, but it helps me to kind of ground myself in a moment when things get big. Mm-hmm. To have this value of what I want to be like, and it kind of brings me back into alignment.
Yeah.
So I think for helping guys establishing things like that, oh man, those are just so huge, man. Yeah. That's so important.
One of the biggest things that a lot of us get confused about is that like we think the things that we do naturally are what our values are. And it's often the opposite, right? Like most of us are naturally gonna tend to tell our kids to stop crying or like, stop doing that. Like our body is seeking that. We don't want this in our space. That's just how our bodies are designed, how our brains are designed. Our values are intentional, and they're often not the most comfortable things either, right? Because we have to be able to tolerate some of the things we have a harder time with to live a valued life. To your kind of North Star point, I look at values as like our compass, right? They make sure that we're on the right path towards these bigger goals we have for who we want to be. If you want to be this or be that, how you're living each day with these intentional actions you're making as a dad are the compass you're holding that are drawing you towards that goal. Yeah. And it's not linear either. Like we have to have a lot of grace and a lot of self-compassion that we're not always going to get it right. There's times where we do yell, where we do snap, where like we just can't do it, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
So that's really big. And, talking to your point of like being a steady presence and the work I do with guys to like define these values, we visualize that stuff. So imagine yourself as a steady presence in your son's life. Just like athletes visualize going out to play football or whatever, we're actually like taking the time to live that internally so that our brain knows that's what we want to do, right?
Yeah.
As it pulls us towards tell your kid to get their damn shoes on. If you are spending time with that presence of I want to be steady here and be patient and curious, whatever those values are, you can have more access to that. And that goes into like some neuroscience and there's some other things there, but values are so important because otherwise you're just kind of like, we're just there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think all in getting to values, I know for me, it's also been important to really get to like, what are my values? Not what are the values that like I think I should have.
Yeah.
That I feel like I'm pressured to have by like whatever voices are out there, but like what is really true for me and like and what it is that I want, and then working in a partnership, if you're in one, is like the second phase of that, because I think it's really easy to be like, oh, I think I should be this and I should value this, so let me adopt that. But that's always so thin,
Values that aren't your own don't hold up very well. And this is where this matters, is like in a therapy room, we can like control the variables and you can, I can do this value, no problem. But when you're in the heat of the moment, stressed, tired, screaming kids, in a fight with your partner, if your value isn't actually something you care about, good luck being able to actually perform that thing, right? Yeah. So it's really important that your values are your own. It's funny because I'll often hear guys kind of give me their list of values. We do this exercise with all my clients. And sometimes I'll go, is this you or your wife? And they go, oh, you're good. Yeah, that's a lot of this is just my wife wanting me to do these things. And I'm like, it's okay to have values that are because like of those things, but if you don't actually care, like you're not going to do them. They're really hard to pull off in the heat of those kind of difficult moments. That's fine.
Yeah. I appreciate you carving time out, for this conversation. I learned a lot. I think it's going to be valuable for a lot of people who listen to this, guys, gals, everyone in between, and like all, like I just feel like there are a lot of guys out there who have a desire to like lean in to this kind of work, but are on the fence. I'm wondering what you would say to men in that position who are feeling like they need help but don't know what next steps to take and feel resistance there.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and try not to be cliche about it all, but I think the assurance that I often give is it's a slow process. Like it's not like you take the first step and then your soul is on the floor of a therapist's office right away. It's a process for you to get that comfort, and that's totally expected and okay. We get really comfortable in our comfort zone, and often for a lot of guys, that's just keeping everything in, and that's normal. That's okay. It's also okay to try something new sometimes if you kind of feel this yearning towards that. And like look around your life, what's not working for you? And I always ask this question, how is that working for you? Right? So you give me this long list of the things you're doing and not doing, and cool, how's that working for you? If you answer that honestly, like not the greatest, or I can be doing it better, then that's a good reason to like reach out and find someone you can connect with.
Yeah. Speaking of connecting with, how can people connect with you?
Yeah, so the best place to kind of find me, follow me is on Instagram. That's at Kickstart Men's Therapy. Same handle on TikTok as well. If you're in Ontario, Canada, where I'm registered as a therapist, it's kickstartmenstherapy.ca is the website. And yeah, those are the best ways to find me and the work I'm doing and the things I'm saying online.
Awesome, man. Well, we'll put that in some of the show notes as well. But this is great, bringing it together here, the U.S. and Canada. Hey, despite all the news and
Yeah.
all the the bad blood in between,
Yeah.
there's lots of love here, man. So I appreciate what you're doing and what you're putting out there in the world. So thank you for what you're doing, and I just wish the best to you, your family, and that your practice up there would continue to thrive, and guys would find their way through your doors, because it's a beautiful thing, man.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. Love to
All
talk.
right, then. All right. Hey, thanks so much for watching, for listening. If you enjoyed it, one way you can support my work is by subscribing, by sharing, all of those things. Thanks so much. I'm incredibly grateful for your support.